I saw some stats that more than half of Americans are opposed to the way that ICE is conducting these mass deportations. Just wanting to protest or taking a stance against the administration does not automatically make you a domestic terrorist.
100% agree with that.
There was actually a big protest happening on
On
14th
14th, which
Street,
is, yeah.
kind of like a central artery in DC, and I heard them chanting. I didn't see any protesters, but they were chanting "ICE meltdown." I don't know, kind of catchy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 36 of Washed Up. I'm Abby, and this is Colin. We are reporting from DC so that you don't have to listen to the legacy media that your grandparents do.
Yeah, we are washed up. In this episode. We're going to be talking about ICE and particularly the shooting that happened that killed 37-year-old Renee Good in Minneapolis last week.
Yeah, definitely when this hit the news, it sparked a lot of conversation, a lot of emotions. There's two videos going around of what had happened, and she's in the car, and the officer shoots her when she's driving away, is what's caught on the different perspectives.
She's sitting in the middle of the road as she's protesting the officers being there, and kind of egging him on in some ways. She said something a little bit like taunting, but that in and of itself is no warrant or license for him to take her life. But then as she's pulling out, her wife is also recording from another angle, and you can't really tell, but in both videos you can sort of see the officer gets like nudged or clipped as she's pulling out, and then that's when he shoots three times through her windshield, then through the side window, and she dies as a result of those injuries. And it's kind of unclear based off of the video, but it does appear from the cell phone footage of the officer that's on the scene who shot her that she kind of clips him as she's pulling out her car.
Which, again, I don't think is everything that happened is any reason that she should have died. It's a pretty gruesome watch. I'm sure that everyone has seen it or has heard about it, as it's been all over the media. It sparked a lot of people posting on Instagram. When we were texting about it, it kind of reminded me of in 2020 with George Floyd's death and how that kind of sparked this revolution of people speaking out and how much publicity that got from that footage too, which was also very gruesome.
Right. I mean, we'd mentioned George Floyd because it's interesting that both of those stories happened in Minneapolis for one, but the ways that the footage of both George Floyd and now Renee Good went so viral, and so that, everyone has seen the different angles, the different footage that was captured, and sort of immediately resorted to, in some cases, it feels like pre-established narratives that both camps have and are able to kind of project onto the situation. And that in and of itself is worrisome to me.
It really reminds me a lot of my media classes in when showing something like a picture or photo or a video and being like, okay, what do you guys see? And then everyone has to kind of say what they see or argue different sides. Like this is just like an exercise within the class and spin it to be supportive of their argument. And that's like the whole thing with, like propaganda and media and how legacy media has been using the video for their gain.
In a way to drive a wedge between people who are already very divided on a certain issue. Some people have been calling it like a Rorschach test, which people probably know in like psychology is like the ink blot test, where you see different images in like a set of nondescript forms, and people kind of project onto it what, it's supposed to tell you something about your psychological state. Um, but I feel like that's sort of what is happening here as well. And for the sake of our viewers, I think we should probably represent both sides of it. Like, what do each camp project onto the situation? If you want, I can try to give my best for what the people who are pro-ICE are saying. They're saying that essentially because she did hit him in some capacity, that he's an officer there to enforce the law. She's interfering with his ability to carry out his job, to follow the law, to he's there as part of ICE, which is Immigration's Customs Enforcement, to arrest people who are here, they would say illegally, undocumented. And because she is, it doesn't help that she's taunting him in the video, even though that is within her right as an American. But because she hit him, it gives him the legal right. We're not legal experts, but you
This is
can't.
like you're reiterating like what
Right.
they're saying.
Right, this is my analysis from the standpoint of the people who are backing ICE in this situation, because she hit him regardless of what the intent was, if he's afraid for his life and she's impeding his ability to enforce the law, then officers are technically within their rights to fire. And when you fire, the expectation is you're shooting to kill oftentimes, not just wound or stop. And that is usually the training. I don't know for ICE specifically, but like in the
For
military,
police.
police, if you're gonna fire, it's usually with the intent to kill.
And then from what I've been seeing, people who are anti-ICE and upset about this situation, upset about her death, is that she was not being she was just trying to flee, and the officer was using an abuse of power by shooting 3 times and killing, when in fact officers, like if they're not threatened for their life, are supposed to, or they should be ones to de-escalate the situation. Like you were saying, like officers are taught like when you're shooting it's to kill, and that somebody who's driving away not even facing towards you, I'd argue is not trying to kill you.
The tail, like the way that people have done analysis of like the tail lights and when they shift from like she's in reverse to she's in drive, people have talked about, well, wouldn't the ICE officer have seen her turning the wheel to the right as if she was going to turn away from him? It's like people have done all kinds of these analyses of the situation, but what's shocking to me though most is that he fired so quickly. Like
It's scary how
yeah.
quickly he fired back.
And just the ways that like I watch it and to me, I'm sure that they're trained to be very like quick on the draw if they feel like they're under threat. And in situations like that, law enforcement does have to be quick on the draw at times because if they really are being threatened, you can't like take a pause to kind of assess always. And so ideally the training for law enforcement, including ICE, would instill that in people, but also instill a high threshold that you'd have to meet before you would be drawing your weapon and firing. But I was just shocked at how quickly he fired, not only once, but again 3 times. And it was like, it seemed to me from the video like it was milliseconds. And that was shocking.
Yeah, that part was, again, like I said, like really scary. I think I was also shocked by that. The people who are defending the video, like saying how he was in danger, or he feels like he's in danger, even if that is, I mean, that is like what you're allowed to base using your power based off of in that as an officer, like with firearm and stuff like that. But to me, like I always think about how blurred that is. Like, who's to say that he was in danger? Like himself, like if he was feeling in danger, then that means he has the right to kill someone.
Right, so like that's the technical like legal standard for when they're allowed to engage with deadly force.
Too blurry to me.
But our question, I think a lot of people's question is, yeah, in instances that are kind of blurred, how do you defend in certain instances the use of deadly force when maybe the perception of the officer is that they're under threat, but that doesn't match necessarily the reality of the situation. And in this case, because her car was turned away, regardless of if she was gonna gun it or floor it or whatever, based off of what I've seen of the video, he probably wasn't his life probably wasn't under threat in that way. Like she wasn't about to run him over, as some people have suggested.
She then proceeded to weaponize her vehicle, and she attempted to run a law enforcement officer over.
And just like from a personal standpoint, I think it's gruesome. Like I hate watching stuff like that. I hate seeing it. I hate that people are fearing for their lives, and I'm not a big fan of ICE in general. I think probably from like past videos you can infer that when we're talking about immigration. And I don't see any situation like most situations I don't see deadly force needing to be necessary.
Right. And we've also I've done some reading about like instances when you are able to engage in lethal force, and fleeing is not one of them. So if in fact she was fleeing and not intending to run him over, as by all accounts it seems to be the case that she was not intending to run him over, then fleeing in and of itself is never an acceptable instance when you can engage in that type of force. So again, it does kind of come down to the subjective perception of the law enforcement and what they're perceiving. And by all accounts, this ICE officer did think his life was in threat, and there was some indication of that in the moment because he was clipped on the side as she was pulling out. And also, I had heard that in June he had been involved in a past incident where he had been dragged by another undocumented immigrant who was fleeing and dragged him like 30 feet. He needed all these stitches. It was, he was really injured by that. My question is, was he maybe overreacting in this situation with Renee Good because he had experienced that, terrible bad injury earlier that he was kind of reenacting or overreacting to given the present threat in the Renee Good situation?
And even in those cases, I can't help but think about like, like the military and police officers and ICE officers about how these situations are just like their power is being able to be abused more often because they're in situations like that. Like no human should be able to like make that decision. Like I think there needs to be better guardrails for things like that. Like when like you're saying, like if you're imposing this what had happened to him onto somebody else, like that's no way of running your job, especially one where you're able to kill people.
Right. I mean, just the sheer power of having that power over other people to take away their life.
Like that
And
does something to
right. Yeah,
someone.
yeah. And I think we talked about a little bit how law enforcement in general, that is like an kind of ungodly amount of power to give to one person, and how that must have a psychological toll on people over time. And how do we as a society account for that? Like a lot of our veterans from past wars come back with post-traumatic stress disorder, and we don't really have a lot of options for them.
And we don't really, yeah, we don't really take care of them as much as we should when it comes to, I think, mental services too.
And so I guess the question being here, like, how do we make sure that people who are engaged in law enforcement are given that amount of power in the name of protecting citizens who are paying for it with our taxes? How do we make sure that they're in a mental space that's they're able to act responsibly and appropriately, and knowing that there is going to be some error on occasion, how do we respond when there isn't a mistake or something as egregious as someone's life being taken?
I don't even really think of ICE in the same way that I think of like police and the military. Like ICE just, I don't know. I'm an anti-ICE person.
I did a little bit of reading on that because I had a similar thought. I was thinking
Like, are they really? They're not there to like protect and serve. Like, I don't know. I'm just like, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around it.
it does seem a bit different because it's ICE and they're there to serve a specific function in like immigration enforcement.
But like, why? But why is ICE funded by the people? Why are we? Why is like? Why are we allowing ICE to be a thing when we're the ones paying for it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because, Donald Trump did run on this platform of sort of mass and indiscriminate deportation of anyone who's here undocumented. And so, in a way, it is like democratic what they're doing by using ICE to carry out that policy because he was elected and that's his agenda as the executive. But I wouldn't say that he's necessarily backed by the full support of the population.
Hmm.
I saw some
Definitely
stats.
not, especially after something like this happens.
I saw some stats that more than half of Americans are opposed to the way that ICE is conducting these mass deportations. And, I think it's very legitimate to ask those kinds of questions of like, are they conducting themselves appropriately and in the way that we would want them to, as we are the ones paying for it, essentially.
I think that institutions like the police and the military are like what I like to call like necessary evils. Like it's like there are people who like these things are needed in society, but sometimes things go wrong, and that's like not that's the bad part of it. Like
Like
your
in an
psychological.
ideal
Yeah.
world, we wouldn't need any law enforcement.
Exactly.
However, we live in the real world where there are bad actors who are trying to exploit and hurt others, and so having military, having law enforcement is unfortunately necessary.
Yeah. That was a good way of saying it.
Well,
Thank you.
I get what you're going with that.
How have you seen DC being affected right now?
I haven't seen too much. Oh, just kidding. Actually, I have. Um, yeah, I don't know. So I went to the grocery store the other day, and as I was leaving, there was just a swarm of cops and police all over the street, and I was like, "Well, what's going on?" And it took me a moment to kind of connect all the dots. Like, there was actually a big protest happening on
On
14th
14th, which
Street,
is, yeah.
kind of like a central artery in DC, and I heard them chanting. I didn't see any protesters, but they were chanting "Ice melt down." I don't know, kind of catchy, but
I was here, yeah, there was so many people, a lot of my friends slash like people I follow on Instagram were posting that they were at protests or posting photos of people protesting in the streets, and it looked like a really big turnout. And I think that is also why this is like reminding me a lot of, in 2020 when that happened with George Floyd, not only because it happened in the same place, but also because it's kind of sparking like a social media type, like,
backlash.
yeah,
Yeah.
where it also is resonating in real life as well, like across different cities. Like we're in DC
Yeah.
right now and we see that.
Let's talk about the reaction a little bit because we kind of laid out for you like what does each side say about the situation based off of the footage that we have, with the caveat that the footage is sort of subjective based off of how you're viewing it and with what narrative you're viewing, with what lens you're viewing it. But let's talk about a little bit how people have been reacting, like online, for instance, or people in positions of power. Like, what have
Like,
you seen Vance, Trump, Kristi Noem say about it?
yeah, all Trump's cabinet is defending it. Like Trump released this long paragraph on X. I mean, like I personally don't have X, but I know Colin, you do. Um,
Currently, I'm Washdub's ex-correspondent because I'm the only one of the two of us who is on X. I wish that I wasn't, but for now, that's my temporary title.
yeah, and Trump's tweet, I was disgusted by it actually because he's only even inciting more, I guess, like divide and things too when he outright just like says, I think he's like saying, yeah, he was threatened. That woman tried to hit him.
Trump has said that the ICE agent got run over,
Yeah, which
which
is
is
a
just blatantly
lie.
not true.
And Vance had said that the ICE agent is protected.
Yeah, I mean, they're sort of just insinuating, if not overtly saying, that the ICE agent acting in his capacity has this sort of like immunity,
Immunity.
which is a weird way of putting it.
It's like an actual term though. Like the immunity term when it comes to like officers and things like that.
Mhm.
A lot of lawyers I've been seeing comment on it too, being like, okay, that we can't just like say that it's immunity without it, going anywhere.
Right. And so again, there are legal terms here that apply that we're not
Like
necessarily
we're not,
able to give you the full extent of the analysis of. But I guess yeah, there was a lot of people on the right who were reflexively defending ICE and law enforcement, and I found that to be a bit odd. At the very least, I thought it would be responsible in this situation to kind of take a step back and say, we don't really know yet. We'll have an investigation. We'll look at all the different angles and all the different POVs, talk to the witnesses, hear what they have to say, and then we'll come up with a conclusion. Like if you're a public official, I think that that should be your statement in a way of or your course of action in the immediate aftermath of this incident.
And them as public figures, like I said, I think they're only lighting a fire. Like people are really upset, and that only just makes them more upset.
So like DHS, Department of Homeland Security, for instance, they have this spokeswoman, Trisha McLaughlin, who I her name comes up in my feed a lot because she's always kind of the one making a statement when they have a public relations problem. And so she'll, put out a statement saying, here's our official position on this incident. And DHS was saying about this incident that Renee Good was a domestic terrorist, which made pretty much everyone I saw angry.
Yeah,
Just that label in and of itself doesn't really obviously match like the
at
description
all.
of Renee Good as people are now recounting who she was and what her life was and what it meant. And I think it's very reactive and incendiary to label her something like that. I just think it's really irresponsible for DHS to be labeling her something like that. I think she was there to protest
Yeah,
because she disagreed on principle with the way that ICE was conducting themselves and the fact that they were in her city doing these operations. And even though I personally wouldn't condone, like parking in the middle of the road as a form of protest, let alone engaging with ICE,
it's still in her right to do so.
we're allowed to protest as Americans, and just wanting to protest or taking a stance against the administration does not automatically make you a domestic terrorist.
100% agree with that. I couldn't have said it any better.
Is there anyone else in like the commentary space that you've seen, like perhaps from the left? How are they reacting to this situation?
Yeah, on the commentary scene, like I know like really left podcasts are talking about it being, I mean, upset, comparing it to George Floyd, talking about the abuse of power that ICE agents are having, and like we were saying, talking about people's right to protest. Pod Save America is one of them that I think that they've talked a good amount about it and talked about how, Trump's cabinet is really just making people even more upset. Everyone on social media that I saw was has who have been posting have strong opinions, whether that be on the left or the right.
Yeah, I mean, people have strong opinions about not only what they think that they're viewing and seeing, but then also like what does it mean in the broader scheme of things in the argument. And I definitely think it shows that people are very divided. We talk on the show a lot. We wish that our public officials would tone it down, take the temperature down when things like this happen. And, we just said the Trump administration was absolutely not doing that. And people on the left also were not really doing that. I would say the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, he was on broadcast right after it happened, and he was very, very angry, and I understand completely why he would be, because this is happening in the city that he's trying to govern and manage and keep under control. But he he was swearing a bit, and he was saying like, "Get the F out of our city," basically to ICE.
And I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the out of Minneapolis.
And again, the circumstances, you can understand why he's having that reaction. But I also do think there's an argument to be made if you're in a leadership position to, again, have the ability to hit pause at times and say, like, we'll do a full investigation, we'll tell you all the different conclusions from our investigation, but not turning up the temperature in a way that, like, now it might lead to mass protests and more people getting hurt or injured or killed or worse. And I don't know. What did you think
Unfortunately, I
about that?
do think when it comes to like, okay, so in my capstone class, we used to talk about what the foundations of democracy are, and one of them is the behaviors of our political elite and how the political elite, with the way that they behave, is a trickle down of everything. So it comes from like the president and,
Mm.
representatives in the state, and then the people who like they're governing, everything that polarization and everything that's been happening with the way that they react and how hot they are on like whatever they're believing in and causing all this divide, it all comes from the top. So the only way to really stop it is from the top, unless the public somehow all comes together and is like, we are not going to stand for this, which I also see like kind of an unrealistic thing of happening. Like a foundation of democracy is that we are able to model the behavior that the political elite are because that's what's essential for a functioning democratic society or a functional republic.
That's an interesting approach. I don't know. I sometimes I do wonder, like, is it that they're setting the example at the top and the people are responding, or is it that they're taking the lead or the sentiment of the public and trying to, well, I view it as like we're their constituents and we elected them, so they should be acting on our behalf and probably taking their cues and taking their action based off of that and knowing like they represent us. But I don't know. I've never personally taken my cues from the top down. I tend to view it more as a bottom up type of thing
Me
if
too.
it's working functionally.
Me too, actually. I think it's really interesting with social media and with how much, because I mean, it used to work the same way with like the news, for example. Like the news used to mean more because there was no social media. So political elite have to go through the news to communicate with their constituents versus like now they're able to go right to us and they don't have to like be super trained on how to talk to the media, or the media can't really expose them when they're exposing themselves, if that makes sense.
Well, it's changed the whole dynamic because it's given politicians more direct access to people
Which
and
I don't know is always good.
yeah, it's a good question because it's more unfiltered, as we were saying. Like the reactions, even from Trump or the mayor of Minneapolis, are very, very unfiltered. But in the past, might it have been better to have certain like layers insulating so that the immediate reaction of everyone wasn't just broadcast for all to see? I don't know.
But there's also, the argument that social media is good for scenarios like this too. Like, I mean, we wouldn't really know what had went down without social media, like without these videos being posted. Like maybe it would have been swept under the rug, or maybe it wouldn't even have any attention, and maybe the ICE officer wouldn't even be under scrutiny or anything like that, and somebody would have just died and gotten away with it without social media. So that is also a whole other thing. Like George Floyd's death was definitely popularized by social media, and I think that was one of the main reasons why that actually went to court.
Totally. So it's like social media can be this great equalizer in a way where everyone is able to have access to the same information from which to draw their conclusions. But sometimes that evidence or that, information is in and of itself driving different narratives. And in that case, it can be more polarizing to have social media access.
Maybe social media is a modern day necessary evil.
It looks like that to me. Yeah. But I don't know, we've definitely talked about the power of social media to shape narratives, and unfortunately, it can get quite out of hand. I'm curious what's going to happen here if the protests that we've been seeing in DC or Minneapolis are going to continue. It looks like to me Minneapolis has been continuing to protest in the aftermath.
Yeah, I haven't seen many protesters in DC since that day that we saw them all out on 14th. Um, I mean, DC has always been protesting, whether, walking the streets or whether through like signs or stickers in terms of like getting ICE out of here, getting the guard out of here. It's a very obvious feeling of how DC feels about what's been happening as a city.
Yeah, and if this does prove to be kind of another flashpoint in terms of like a broader social movement, like what we saw with George Floyd and BLM back in 2020, I don't know. I'm it seems like it less obvious to me what the path forward is because this is about a policy that's being enforced from the federal level down on the people with again ICE and the deportations and all of this. So like what would be the optimal pathway forward for citizens to get some kind of like recourse in this situation? It seems like not very obvious to me what the solution is.
I mean, I couldn't tell you what the solution is either.
You know what this kind of dovetails with is actually what's happening in Iran right now, because their country, their theocratic leaders are in a way being threatened to the whole government might topple, and there's people out in Iran protesting all over the place, and in another way, social media has been driving that because there's an opportunity whenever there's this instability or chaos
Hmm.
for actors on both sides to exploit that situation and push their own agenda. And so you're seeing that in Iran right now, where if you go on social media, you'll see that like, oh, the people of Iran hate their government. It's gonna topple. It'll be so great. It'll usher in like all this peace. And there's even people saying like, bring back the Shah, the Pahlavi dynasty. Will like reinstate it and this and that. And then there's other people saying like, well, wait a minute. If Iran's government falls, that could actually be really bad for not only the people of Iran, but also like even the U.S. interests in that region. Because chaos is oftentimes like tyranny is really bad, but chaos can sometimes be even worse than tyranny. So it might open up a whole nother can of worms if their government does in fact fall.
Hmm. And going off of, social media popularizing slash confusing people's interpretations of things, like it's the same thing with when we were recording about Venezuela too. I was like trying to sift through social media to see like what people in Venezuela think, but like it's confusing because of like Venezuelans who aren't in Venezuela talking about it versus like some people are very happy versus some people are not, and I couldn't really get like a general consensus on it.
Right. I mean, so in the aftermath of the U.S. raiding Venezuela, capturing Maduro, and it seems like they're going to keep their vice president, who's now their president, Delcy Rodriguez, who's kind of running the show in
Interim.
Venezuela. Interim
For how
slash
long?
president now. It seems like she's gonna stay, but like exactly what you were saying, we were trying to figure out like how did Venezuelans actually feel about that? Are they cool
Like
with
I feel
it?
like you can never know unless like you actually know someone in Venezuela.
Hmm. But like we were seeing AI videos of like quote unquote Venezuelans like crying, being like, "Oh, I'm so glad that Maduro's gone." And then it's like the most obvious AI for now. It's very obvious that it's fake, but
But I feel like I've been seeing older people be like, see, like blah
yeah.
blah blah, Trump did a good thing.
Like unsuspecting people might see that and run with it, and they have been. They've been reposting those videos all over the internet, and it's like again, it's driving a narrative, but it's not rooted in any reality. And there's a danger in all of these three stories: Venezuela, the ICE shooting, killing of Renee Good, and then Iran, where people are using social media to kind of weaponize whatever narrative they're trying to um, promote in the first place.
Totally. Um,
So we can give some more updates on Venezuela, I think, because there are
yeah,
some
what's
updates.
what are the updates? Maduro's still in, or yeah, Maduro's still in New
The
York.
regime, Maduro's in New York. The Maduro regime has now been kind of taken over by Delcy Rodriguez, who is cooperating with the U.S. But like, what does that exactly mean? Is
Yeah, what
she?
does cooperation mean? How long is this gonna go on for?
I've heard a lot about the U.S. We've talked about the interest that they have in the oil of Venezuela and how they are trying to find different ways that the U.S. can now like get in on that business in Venezuela. And it seems like they're okay with keeping Rodriguez possibly on the condition that she'll permit us to go
And
and
take their
drill.
oil.
And like
Drill, baby, drill.
we've also had a blockade on Venezuela so that they can't send their oil tankers elsewhere around the world and yeah, I guess sell, distribute it. We've taken over a couple of tankers that they've tried to sneak past the blockade. And Yeah, it seems like for now Venezuela as a country is holding up under the new leadership, but it's definitely not a done deal.
No, definitely not. And if you're Venezuelan, let us know how you feel about everything that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, like that's what journalism would do is it would be able to seek out real sources that they can verify so that we can actually get a good sense of things. And social media is not
Social
that.
media is not a verified journalist with credentials. I always think about like what our advisor used to get mad at us for. And one of those is, I mean, that was in our college newspaper, that was like a no, never type thing of anonymous sources, except if it's like about abuse and it's like corroborating a lot of different viewpoints. But even then, that was like really hard for us to do.
Yeah, I think at best the internet can kind of give you a sense of which way like the sentiment is going. I think if you're attuned to it and you know what all the competing interests are and how the situation is being exploited by, different sides, you can kind of get a sense of which way the wind is blowing when you go on social media like X for your news. But yeah, I would certainly not like take it to the bank and view any singular piece of information you find on the internet as verified unless you go through the steps of verifying it, which ideally involves communicating directly with individuals on the ground, eyewitnesses, etc.
Exactly. And it's even hard to believe some things on social media or legacy media even of like if you're having like your own biases and stuff like that and like reading articles in the news. Like I don't want to sit here and be like don't watch the news, but it like cuz like this is obviously biased in me even saying this because like we have like our little I'm like you can only trust us as for like getting the news from legacy media. But it's definitely hard when it comes to, like clickbait culture and like people trying to get like if you're only reading headlines sometimes it looks like people trying to get as many clicks as possible, which you can't even get mad at anymore because that's kind of just how it works now. Like if you want to be funded, you want clicks, you want to entice people to click on it, and you have to just hope that everyone gets like the full context of everything, which is I think something that we deal with too.
Right. I mean, to your point, what you just said, we will trash the legacy media all day long because there are sort of inherent flaws in the way that their business model is set up. Again, it does lead to sort of people getting entrenched in these camps, the clickbait stuff that they're trying to now capitalize on with like a digital presence and feeding into pre-established bias is something that legacy media is prone to do.
And
Um,
it also reestablishes like what I guess the sides are supposed to believe in. Like if I think both of us kind of do like a good job of trying to figure out what we think how what we believe in or slash like what is happening in the news without, like only intaking say like conservative pieces versus like only intaking like left pieces and things like that. Like there are a lot of people who will blindly follow their leaders when it comes to partisan politics. Like for example, Trump.
Right. I mean, really the only way to be a critical and independent thinker is to look at what both sides are saying and maybe find the happy medium, but also just weighing up, the validity of both of the arguments that are being made. And it's not always a happy medium. Like sometimes one side is legitimately more accurate and correct than the other one. But I feel like usually the truth is kind of somewhere in the middle of the two polarized sides. And like I was saying, in as much as we trash on legacy media for feeding into the polarization of it, we are still somewhat reliant on them,
Mhm.
even as independent commentators, for forming our own independent conclusions. So it's this kind of interesting symbiotic relationship between independent media like us and the digital sphere exclusively versus those pre-established media organizations.
Totally. And you should support Washed Up because the only way that we can keep going and keep implementing this thought process is to have supportive viewers like you all.
I will say it was kind of heartening that when this situation with Renee Good happened, a lot of people did reach out to us personally and ask
It
us
was Really.
like, what do you guys think about this? And, it was a terrible story. So responding, giving our feedback, giving our insight, giving our thoughts is not always easy, but it is encouraging to us when people actually are asking for it. And I like the fact that the longer that we do this, we build up that trust with people who value what we have to say in a way where, like they're actively seeking it out.
Yes, so thank you to the loyal washed up fans. My goal is to get to 100 subscribers at least this year, so spread the word. I think it's an attainable goal.
Yeah.
Okay, washed up
Watched up.
out.